interesting. I don't really know how their practices work, so I think this will be an extremely interesting read for me. Now, if you have any Wikipedias you'd like me to read, please leave them down in the comments below. I read every comment and I make sure that I have time to respond to every one. So, without any further ado, please remember I have a bad time trying to pronounce scientific terminology or difficult names, so don't roast me on that. But if you do find that I say something wrong, I would love help saying it in the comments. Please remember, if you haven't, to subscribe, to like the video, and also to say hello in the comments. Okay, practices. The Wiccan High Priestess and journalist Margot Adler stated that Wiccan rituals were not dry, formalized, repetitive experiences performed with the intent of inducing a religious experience in the participants, thereby altering their consciousness. Kind of like getting high, I guess. She noticed that many Wiccans remain skeptical about the existence of the supernatural, but remain involved in Wicca because of its ritual experiences. She quoted one as saying that "I love myth, dream, visionary art. The craft is a place where all of these things fit together. Beauty, pageantry, music, dance, song, and dream." The Wiccan practitioner and historian Aidan Kelly claimed that the practices and experiences within Wicca were more important than the beliefs, stating, "It's a religion of ritual rather than theology. The ritual is first, the myth is second." Similarly, Adler stated that Wicca permits total skepticism about even its own methods, myths, and rituals. The anthropologist Susan Greenwood characterized Wiccan rituals as a form of resistance to mainstream culture. She saw these rituals as a healing space away from the ills of the wider culture, one in which the female practitioners can redefine and empower themselves. Wiccan rituals usually take place in private. The reclaiming tradition has utilized its rituals for political purposes. Let's move now to ritual practices. Many rituals within Wicca are used when celebrating the Sabbats, worshipping the deities, and working on magic. Often these take place on a full moon, or in some cases a new moon, which is known as a Sabbat. In typical rites, the coven or a solitary assembles inside a ritually cast and purified magic circle. Casting the circle may involve the invocation of the guardians of the cardinal points alongside their respective classical elements: air, fire, water, and earth. Once the circle is cast, a seasonal ritual may be performed. Prayers to the god and goddess are said, and spells are sometimes worked. These may include various forms of raising energy, including raising a cone of power to send healing or other magic to persons outside of the sacred space. In constructing his ritual system, Garden drew upon older forms of ceremonial magic, in particular those found in the writings of Aleister Crowley. The classic ritual scheme in British traditional Wicca tradition is 1. Purification of this sacred space and the participants. 2. Casting the circle. 3. Calling the elemental quarters. 4. Cone of power. 5. Drawing down the gods. 6. Spell casting. 7. Great rite. 8. Wine, cakes, chanting, dancing, and games. And 9. Farewell to the quarters and participants. special set of magical tools. These usually include a knife called an athame, a wand, a pentacle, and a chalice. But other tools include a broomstick known as a besom, a cauldron, candles, incense, and a curved blade known as a bowline. An altar is usually present in the circle, on which ritual tools are placed, and representations of the god and the goddess may be displaced. Before entering the circle, some traditions fast for the day, and or ritually bathe. After a ritual has finished, the god, goddess, and guardians are thanked, and the directions are dismissed, and the circle is closed. A central aspect of Wicca, particularly in Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca, often sensationalized by the media, is traditional practice of working in the nude, also known as skyclad. This practice seemingly derives from a line in Aridia, Charles Lilland's supposed record of Italian witchcraft. Many Wiccans believe that the performing ritual skyclad allows power to flow from the body in a manner unimpeded by clothes. Some also note that it removes signs of social rank and differentiation, and thus encourages unity among the practitioners. Some Wiccans seek legitimacy for the practice by stating that various ancient societies performed their rituals while nude. One of the Wicca's best known liturgical texts is the Charge of the Goddess. The most commonly used version used by the Wiccans today is the recension of Doreen Valiente, who developed it from Gardner's wording of the original charge, added extracts from Aleister Crowley's work, including the Book of the Law, especially from chapter 1 spoken by Nuit, the star goddess, thus linking modern Wicca irrevocably to the principles of Thelema. Valiente rewrote Gardner's version in verse, keeping the material derived from Aridia but removing the material from Crowley. Now, onto sex magic. Other traditions wear robes with cords tied around the waist, or even normal street clothes. In certain traditions, ritualized sex magic is performed in the form of the Great Rite, whereby a high priest and high priestess invoked the god and goddess to possess them before performing sexual intercourse to raise magical energy for use in spell work. In nearly all cases, it is instead performed in token, thereby merely symbolically using the athame to symbolize the penis and the chalice to symbolize the womb. For some Wiccans, the ritual space is a space of resistance in which the sexual morals of Christianity and patriarchy can be subverted, and for this reason they have adopted techniques from the BDSM subculture into their rituals. Interesting. Publicly, many Wiccan groups have tended to excise the role of sex magic from their image. This has served to both escape the tabloid sensationalism that has targeted the religion since the 1950s, and the concerns surrounding the satanic ritual abuse hysteria in the 1980s and 1990s. Interesting. I wonder how frequent sex magic and stuff like that is. If they've kind of excised it away from their public image, does that mean that they've stopped doing it as much, or is it still commonplace and they just don't talk about it? It's always interesting to see how things change and evolve over time. Now, talking about the Wheel of the Year. Wiccans celebrate several seasonal festivals of the year, commonly known as Sabbats. Collectively, these occasions are termed the Wheel of the Year. Most Wiccans celebrate a set of 8 of these Sabbats. However, other groups, such as those associated with the clan of Tubal-Cain, only follow are adhered to. The 4 Sabbats that are common to all British-derived groups are the cross-quarter days, sometimes referred to as Greater Sabbats. The names of these festivals are in some cases taken from the old Irish fire festivals, though in most traditional Wiccan covens the only commonality with the Celtic festival is the name. Gardner himself made use of the English names of these holidays, stating that the 4 great Sabbats are Candlemas, Stick, May Eve, Lammas, and Halloween. The equinoxes and solstices are celebrated also. In the Egyptologist Margaret Murray's The Witch Cult in Western Europe in 1921 and The God of the Witches in 1933, in which she dealt with what she believed had been a historical witch cult, she stated that the 4 main festivals had survived Christianization and had been celebrated in the pagan witchcraft religion. Subsequently, when Wicca was first developing in the 1930s through to the 1960s, many of the early groups such as Robert Cochrane's Clan of Tubal-Cain and Gerald Gardner's Bricket-Wood Coven adopted the commemoration of these 4 Sabbats. As described by Murray, the other 4 festivals commemorated by many Wiccans are known as Lesser Sabbats. They are only the solstices and equinoxes, and they were only adopted in 1958 by members of the Bricket-Wood Coven, before they were subsequently adopted by other followers of the Gardnerian tradition. They were eventually adopted by followers of other traditions like Alexandrian Wicca and the Dianic tradition. The names of these holidays that are commonly used today are often taken from Germanic pagan holidays. However, the festivals are not reconstructive in nature, nor do they often resemble their historical counterparts. Instead, they exhibit a form of universalism. The rituals that are observed may display cultural influences from the holidays from which they take their names, as well as influences from other unrelated cultures. Interesting, and they have a list here. And they're different days on the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. And so I'll just read out the name of the Sabbat and the associations that it has. First one is Samhain, aka Halloween, which is related to the death and the ancestors. We've got Yuletide, which is about winter solstice and the rebirth of the sun. We've got Imbolc, aka Candlemas, first signs of spring. We have Ostara, which is the vernal equinox and the beginning of spring. We've got Beltane, aka May Eve or May Day, the full flowering of spring, Fairy Folk. We've got Litha, which is summer solstice. We've got Lungahasnasad, aka Lammas, which is the first fruits. And we've got Mabon, aka Modron, which is autumnal equinox, the harvest of grain. Now we move to rites of passage. Various rites of passage can be found within Wicca. Perhaps the most significant of these is an initiation ritual through which somebody joins the craft and becomes a Wiccan. In British traditional Wicca, BTW traditions, there is a line of initiatory descent that goes back to Gerald Gardner, and from him is said to go back to the New Forest Coven. However, the existence of this coven remains unproven. Gardner himself claimed that there was a traditional length of a year and a day between when a person began studying the craft and when they were initiated, although he frequently broke the rule with his initiates. In BDW, initiation only accepts someone into the first degree. To proceed to the second degree, an initiate has to go through another ceremony in which they name and describe the uses of the ritual tools and implements. It is also at this ceremony that they are given their craft name. By holding the rank of second degree, a BDW is considered capable of initiating others into the craft, or founding their own semi-autonomous covens. The third degree is the highest in BDW, and it involves the participation of the Great Rite, either actual or symbolically, and in some cases ritual flagellation, which is a rite often dispensed with due to its sado-masochistic overtones. By holding this rank, an initiate is considered capable of forming covens that are entirely autonomous of their parent coven. According to the New Age religious scholar James R. Lewis, in his book Witchcraft Today, an encyclopedia of Wiccan and neo-pagan traditions, a high priestess becomes a queen when she successfully hived off her first new coven under a new third-degree high priestess. In the Orthodox Gardnerian system. Wow, that's super interesting. She then becomes eligible to wear the moon crown. The sequence of high priestess and queens traced back to Gerald Gardner is known as a lineage, and every Orthodox Gardnerian priestess has a set of lineage papers proving the authenticity of her status. The three-tier degree system following the initiation is largely unique to BDW, and traditions heavily based upon it. The Cochranean tradition, which is not BDW, but based upon the teaching of Robert Cochrane, does not have the 3 degrees of initiation, merely having the stages of novice and initiate. Some solitary Wiccans also perform self-initiation rituals to dedicate themselves to becoming a Wiccan. The first of these to be published was in Paul Huston's Mastering Witchcraft in 1970, and unusually involved recitation of the Lord's Prayer backwards as a symbol of defiance against the historical witch hunt. Subsequent, more overtly pagan self-initiation rituals have since been published in books designed for solitary Wiccans by authors like Doreen Valiente, Scott Cunningham, and Silver Ravenwolf. Ravenwolf, wow, what a cool surname. Hand fasting is another celebration held by Wiccans, and is the commonly used term for their weddings. Some Wiccans observe the practice of a trial marriage for a year and a day, which some traditions hold should be contracted on the Sabbat of Lungensat, as this was the traditional time for trial. Tell-down marriages among the Irish. A common marriage vow in Wicca is for as long as love lasts, instead of the traditional till death do us part. The first known Wiccan wedding ceremony took part in 1960 among the Bricket Wood Coven and between Frederick Lamont and his first wife Gillian. Infants in Wiccan families may be involved in a ritual called Wiccaning, which is analogous to christening. The purpose of this is to present the infant to the god and goddess for protection. Parents are advised to give their children the gift of Wicca in a manner suitable for their age. In accordance with the importance put on free will in Wicca, the child is not expected or required to adhere to Wicca or other forms of paganism, should they not wish to do so when they reach adulthood. Now, we look at the Book of Shadows. In Wicca, there is no set sacred text such as the Christian Bible, the Jewish Tanakh, the Hindu Gita, or the Islamic Quran, although there are certain scriptures and texts that various traditions hold to be important and influence their beliefs and practices. Gerald Gardner used a book containing many different texts in his covens known as the Book of Shadows, among other names, which he would frequently add to and adapt. In his Book of Shadows there are texts taken from various sources, including Charles Godfrey Lalonde's Aradia, or the Gospel of Witches from 1899, and the works of the 19th to 20th century occultist Aleister Crowley, whom Gardner knew personally. Also in the book are examples of poetry largely composed by Gardner and his high priestess Doreen Valiente, the most notable of which is The Charge of the Goddess. Now, here's a quote from Gerald Gardner to his followers. The Book of Shadows is not a Bible or Quran, it is a personal cookbook of spells that have worked for the owner. I'm giving you mine to copy to get you started. As you gain experience, discard those spells that don't work for you and substitute those that you have thought of yourself. Similar in use to the grimoires of ceremonial magicians, the book contained instructions for how to perform rituals and spells, as well as religious poetry and chants like Iker Iker Asarak to use in those rituals. Gardner's original intention was that every copy of the book would be different, because a student would copy from their initiators, but changing things which they felt to be personally ineffective. However, amongst many Gardnerian witches today, particularly in the United States, all copies of the books are kept identical to the version that the High Priestess Monique Wilson copied from Gardner, with nothing being altered. The Book of Shadows was originally meant to be kept a secret from non-initiates into BDW, but parts of the book have been published by authors including Charles Cardell, Lady Sheba, Janet Farrar, and Stuart Farrar. Now we go to symbolism. The pentagram is a symbol commonly used by Wiccans. Wiccans often understand the pentagram's 5 points as representing each of the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and aether/spirit. It is also regarded as a symbol of the human, with the 5 points representing the head, arms, and legs. Now, we move to this structure. There is no overarching organizational structure to the Wicca. In Wicca, all practitioners are considered to be priests and priestesses. Wicca generally requires a ritual of initiation. Now moving to traditions. In the 1950s, throughout to the 1970s, when the Wiccan movement was largely confined to the lineaged groups such as Gardnerian Wicca and Alexandrian Wicca, a tradition usually implies the transfer of a lineage by initiation. However, with the rise of more and more such groups, often being founded by those with no previous initiatory lineage, the term came to be a synonym for a religious denomination within Wicca. There are many such traditions, and there are also many solitary practitioners who do not align themselves with any particular lineage, working alone. Some covens have formed, but who do not follow any particular tradition, instead choosing their influences and practices eclectically. Those traditions which trace a line of initiatory descent back to Gerald Gardner include Gardnerian Wicca, Alexandrian Wicca, and Algard tradition. Because of their joint history, they are often referred to as British followers often trace their influences back to Susanna Budapest. Some of these groups prefer to refer to themselves as witches, thereby distinguishing themselves from the BDW traditions, who more typically use the term Wiccan. During the 1980s, Vivian Crowley, an initiate of both the Gardnerian and Alexandrian traditions, merged the two. Pearson noted that Wicca has evolved and, at times, mutated quite dramatically into completely different forms. Wicca has also been customized to the various national contexts into which it has been introduced. For instance, in Ireland, the veneration of ancient Irish deities has been incorporated into Wicca. Now, thank you so much for joining me for another episode, and I will see you in part 4. This seems to be a long one, but I am thoroughly